فإلا ذو الفقار.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today in tradition number 46 from 110 Lessons for Life from the teachings of the Commander of the Faithful, Imam Ali, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, we want to look at the topic which he introduces as the reality of fasting. Now, before we begin with the hadith, let us bring forth this introduction which tells us, and this is something which is common amongst our scholars and the commentators of the noble traditions of the Prophet and his noble family, which is that when it comes to acts of worship in Islam, whether it be things such as praying, fasting, the Hajj pilgrimage, and any other act of worship, we realize and appreciate that it has an inner and an outer. It has an apparent aspect to it and an inner reality behind that act. There's the outward and the inward. Just as we as human beings have both the inward and the outward, we have a physical body, we have these limbs which control our movements, but we also have an inner core, our soul, our spirit, which guides us, which pushes us, which encourages us towards different ways and paths within our life. Worship is a similar concept, that there is an outward form, which is what we see, what we perform with our body, the physical actions of the acts of worship, such as praying, fasting, the Hajj. And then also there is the inner core, the rationale, why we are doing something, the wisdom, the philosophy behind it, and many other such aspects of the acts of worship. So as an example, our salat, the prayers, Jamaat prayers, for example, in congregation, we see in many centers around the world, including at the time of Hajj, when millions upon millions of Muslims make their way towards Mecca and the other holy areas, and obviously to Medina as well. You see that in a congregational prayer in Mecca, in Masjid al-Haram, maybe 1 million people or maybe 500,000 people are performing the daily actions of the daily prayers. That is the outward form. That is the apparent that we can see of the prayer. This is the body of the prayer. But the soul of the prayer is something much more deeper than that. It is this unity that should be taking place amongst the Muslims. It should be the eradication of sins, of transgressions against the laws of God, as God tells us in the Quran, is the soul of worship. Unfortunately, we see not only in Mecca and Medina and in the Arab world in general, but in the Muslim world on a whole, and wherever Muslims may be, that the physical is there, the actions are present, the body of worship is there, but the spirit is missing. And therefore we see in our societies discrimination and many other aspects of life that take place, even though we all perform the prayers united together, at least apparently united. And so we understand that there is a soul and a spirit behind everything. And so let us look at the tradition from the Commander of the Faithful, in which he gives us some guidance and details on the soul and the spirit of the act of fasting, and what we should be feeling and experiencing deep down within our hearts when it comes to the fast, whether it be the Ramadan fast or a mustahab, a recommended fast. And the Commander of the Faithful has been quoted as saying the following statement: fasting truly means to keep away from the prohibitions, the sins, just as a person keeps away from eating and drinking in the state of fasting. When we reflect on this saying and many other such sayings from the Commander of the Faithful, specifically for more information you can refer to saying number 252 in the short sayings in Najul Balagha, where the Commander of the Faithful lists multiple acts of worship and the philosophy behind each and every one of them. But we see when it comes to fasting, as the Commander of the Faithful says, that fasting has a body to it, it has an outward form, and it also has a spirit, it has an inward form. Obviously, for the outward form, we look at the books of our jurists, the scholars that we take our religious rulings from, and they tell us to eat, to drink, to have any thick dust come down the throat, to have relationships with our spouse, and all of the many other things that are within the books of jurisprudence, that these invalidate the fast. This is the outward form. This is the body of the fasting, so to speak, that one has to keep away from all of these things which are enumerated by our scholars of jurisprudence. But deeper than that, as the Commander of the Faithful shows us, is that there is another level of fasting. There is a level where we're not only primarily concerned with the things which the jurists speak about, the food, the drink, smoking, and many other things that invalidate the fast. But there is also the spiritual aspect of it, keeping away from the sins of the tongue, for example, keeping away from sins using the eyes, the ears, any body part. And so in order to fully comprehend and appreciate fasting, and to get to that level where Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah that fasting has been prescribed for us as a Muslim community, just as it was prescribed upon nations that came before us, so that perhaps we may gain in our taqwa, in our consciousness of God, we have to realize that to gain in taqwa is not just to keep away from food and drink, but rather it is a complete change in heart as well within the month of Ramadan. We close and remind ourselves that our scholars of spirituality have enumerated 3 levels of people who fast. They say the basic level of fasting is where a person keeps away from those things which would invalidate the fast, such as eating, as drinking, and the list goes on as our scholars have enumerated. This is the basic level of fasting. The basic believer who is seeking to merely follow Allah's commandments and obligations and prohibitions would only get to this level. The second level of fasters, as the scholars tell us, are those who not only keep away from the things which would invalidate a fast, but also they ensure themselves that they keep away from all of the negative ethical and moral and spiritual traits, so that they are also able to get to a better and a higher level of proximity to Allah within the period of fasting. The third and the pinnacle of fasting is when a person ensures that he or she fasts only for the sake of Allah. So yes, they would be mindful of keeping away from food and drink and everything else. Yes, they would also be careful of their tongue, of their speech, of their sight, of their hearing, of everything that they do. But at the third level, their only and sole goal in fasting is to attain Allah, to attain the pleasure and the good fortune of being close in proximity, in spiritual proximity to Allah. And this is the level which each and every one of us should seek to attain, is that third level of proximity to Allah, where we fast simply for the fact that Allah deserves, He is worthy of us submitting and following His orders and His requirements from us as believers. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ali